True War Encounters. How Jake McNiece used M2 Carbine, Paratrooper in 1944 with rapid judgment to extract his unit, omitted. The M2 Carbine's folding stock digs into Jake McNiece's shoulder as he fires another controlled burst toward the hedgerow tree line. 30 yards behind him, 8 paratroopers from scattered sticks press themselves into the mud of a sunken farm road south of Carrington. The road is centuries old, a cattle path cut 8 feet deep into Norman earth, flanked by dirt walls thick with roots and overgrowth. Defensible for maybe 30 seconds, a death trap after that. German voices echo through the morning fog. McNiece counts seconds, not minutes, because that's all they have. The MG-42 crew on the ridge hasn't figured out yet that the Americans are trapped without heavy weapons, without radio contact, without any hope of reinforcement. When they do, it's over. The M2 is lighter than the M1 Garand most riflemen carry, designed specifically for paratroopers who need to move fast through hedgerows and jump with minimal weight. McNiece prefers it. Faster rate of fire, easier to maneuver in the bocage's tight corners. The selector switch lets him flip between semi-auto for precision and full auto for close-range chaos. 4 magazines left. Maybe 90 rounds total. Not enough to fight their way out. Just enough to buy time and make the kind of split-second calls that separate survivors from statistics. Behind him, Private Bowers whispers a question McNiece pretends not to hear. The kid landed 3 miles off target in the pre-dawn darkness, lost his rifle in a flooded ditch, and spent 2 hours wandering through German-held hedgerows before McNiece found him sitting against a stone wall, shaking. Now he's asking if they're going to die here. McNiece checks the carbine's magazine. 17 rounds left in this one. The folding stock is already marked with French mud, the metal warm from repeated bursts. He'd grabbed the M2 off a dead paratrooper near the drop zone. His own Thompson had been lost when his chute tangled in an apple tree, and he'd cut himself free 20 feet up. The carbine had been lying next to a supply bundle, half submerged in a drainage ditch. No ID tags nearby. Just the weapon, 3 spare magazines, and a sense that whoever carried it last didn't need it anymore. The MG-42 opens up again, chewing apart the top edge of the embankment. Dirt and roots rain down. McNiece scans left, then right. The road curves ahead into thicker hedgerows. If they move now, the machine gun will cut them apart. If they stay, the Germans will flank both sides and drop grenades into the road like they're fishing. He counts his men again. 8 faces staring at him. None of them asking if they're going to die, just waiting to see what McNasty does next. In training, they'd told him the M2 Carbine was a compromise weapon. Not enough punch for long-range work. Burns through ammo too fast on full auto. But right now, in this sunken road with fog rolling across Norman fields and German voices getting closer, it's the only thing between his scattered squad and a shallow grave in French mud. McNiece makes his first judgment in under 3 seconds. They can't go forward, can't stay still, can't go back. That leaves up. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation, and stay with us for the next chapters. 3 hours earlier, McNiece had been hanging from an apple tree in the dark, soaring through parachute risers with his jump knife, while tracers stitched the sky above Normandy. The 506th PIR's drop had scattered across 10 miles of bocage country, blown off course by winds and German flak that turned the night into a light show of burning aircraft and parachutes drifting into flooded fields. He'd hit the ground hard, rolled through ankle-deep water, and immediately started moving. Training said regroup at the rally point. Instinct said the rally point was probably crawling with Germans who'd watched the drop and were waiting for confused paratroopers to stumble into prearranged kill zones. McNiece had found 3 men in the first hour, 2 more near a burned-out barn. By dawn, he'd gathered 8, none from his original stick, all disoriented, half without their primary weapons. One had a shattered ankle. Another couldn't remember which company he belonged to. A kid named Ramirez kept asking about his squad leader. a Sergeant McNiece had seen hanging dead in his harness 2 hedgerows back. The mission had been straightforward on paper. Locate scattered equipment bundles northwest of their intended drop zone near Carentan, retrieve demolition supplies, and link up with the battalion pushing toward Saint-Côme-du-Mont. But McNiece had learned in 3 combat jumps that paper plans dissolved the moment you hit French soil. Drop zones in Normandy were never clean. 80% of the 101st Airborne had landed scattered. Most small unit actions in the first 48 hours were improvised, chaotic, and led by NCOs making it up as they went. He'd kept his group moving carefully through the bocage, staying low, avoiding roads. Then the German patrol had stumbled into them near the farm road. 20 infantry with an MG-42 team and a Panzerfaust operator, moving fast, coordinated, hunting for isolated American stragglers. The first burst caught them in the open. McNiece's group had dove into the sunken road, and now here they were. Corporal Jensen edges closer, his face pale. He's 23 but looks 40 in the grey morning light filtering through the fog. Jensen had been with McNiece on a demolition job in England, watching him wire a practice bridge with a calm precision that seemed at odds with his reputation as a troublemaker. "We could try moving one at a time over the embankment," Jensen whispers. "Suppress and displace." McNiece shakes his head. The MG-42 would shred anyone who moved. He's watched what that weapon does to exposed infantry. 1,200 rounds per minute. The sound alone is enough to freeze men in place. "We go over together or not at all," McNiece says. "I go first. You and Ramirez give me covering fire. When I'm over, you move the squad." Jensen stares at him like he's insane. Maybe he is. The Filthy 13 had a reputation for being half crazy anyway. McNiece and his crew from the demolition platoon, the ones who jumped with mohawk haircuts and war paint, who ignored half the regulations and accomplished the impossible demolitions everyone else said couldn't be done. But reputation doesn't stop bullets. McNiece knows this. He'd watched 2 friends die in Sicily when a bridge demolition went wrong, the charges detonating early because someone had miscalculated the fuse timing. He still hears the sound of that explosion in quiet moments, still sees their faces when he closes his eyes. The M2 Carbine sits across his lap now, select a switch on semi-auto, safety off. He counts down from 3 with his fingers. On 0, Bowers and Ramirez rise just enough to fire blind over the embankment. The Germans instinctively drop. McNiece vaults upward, boots finding purchase in the gnarled roots, and rolls over the top into thick grass on the other side. McNiece lands hard in the grass and immediately swings the M2 toward the stone barn 60 yards out. The Panzerfaust team is exactly where he expected, moving to flank, trying to get an angle on the sunken road. He flips the selector to semi-auto, steadies his breathing for half a heartbeat, and squeezes the trigger 4 times. 2 rounds hit. The team scatters into the barn's shadow. From the embankment behind him, he hears Ramirez shouting something in Spanish, probably a prayer. Bowers is still firing short bursts, keeping the Germans' heads down. McNiece moves parallel to the sunken road, staying low in the tall grass, using the hedgerow as cover. Every few seconds, he glances back to make sure the squad is still holding position. The bocage country near Carentan is a maze of small fields bordered by ancient earthen walls topped with thick hedgerows. Perfect defensive terrain. The Germans have learned to use it well, setting up interlocking fields of fire, turning every lane and crossroads into a potential ambush. McNiece has learned to hate and respect it in equal measure. 50 yards ahead, he spots the MG-42 nest. 3 Germans dug into a shallow crater at the base of the ridge, the barrel trained downward toward the road. They haven't seen him yet. They're focused on the targets they can hear. His squad still firing sporadically from the sunken road, keeping up the illusion of a pinned force trying to hold position. McNiece drops prone and crawls forward 20 yards until he's within effective range. The M2 Carbine isn't built for long-distance precision work, but at 40 yards, with a stable firing position, it's lethal enough. He takes a slow breath, aligns the front sight post with the gunner's silhouette, and squeezes. The carbine bucks against his shoulder. The gunner slumps. The assistant tries to swing the barrel around. McNiece fires again. 2 rounds, center mass. The third German scrambles backward, abandoning the weapon. For maybe 10 seconds, there's silence. Then German voices start shouting commands somewhere in the fog. They're regrouping, trying to figure out what just happened. McNiece uses those seconds. He sprints back along the hedgerow, firing short bursts toward the barn to keep the Panzerfaust team pinned, then vaults back over the embankment into the sunken road. His squad is already moving before he gives the order. They've heard the MG-42 go quiet. They know what it means. Jensen helps the paratrooper with the broken ankle. Ramirez clutches a salvaged bar with no ammunition. They move fast but controlled. No panic, no sprinting, just disciplined urgency drilled into them through training that feels like a lifetime ago. McNiece takes point, the M2 up and ready. Behind them, German voices grow louder. The patrol is regrouping, but slowly, confused by the sudden attack from their flank, uncertain how many Americans they're actually facing. McNiece counts on that confusion. Chaos is a weapon if you know how to wield it. The sunken road opens into a wider drainage ditch that connects to a bombed-out orchard McNiece recognizes from aerial photos he'd studied before the jump. If they can reach the orchard, they can link up with elements of the 502nd reportedly holding a crossroads half a mile east. A single thought keeps repeating in his head. Keep them moving. Don't let them think. Don't let them realize how close this is. The M2's folding stock is slick with sweat and mud against his hands. 3 magazines left. Would you follow the orders exactly or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take. And share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. They reach the orchard as the first mortar rounds start falling near the farm road. Germans calling in fire on their last known position. McNiece keeps his squad moving through shattered apple trees, their boots crunching on broken branches and spent shell casings from an earlier firefight. The morning fog is starting to lift, which means they're more exposed, but can also see threats coming. Jensen suddenly grabs McNiece's shoulder and points. American helmets, visible in a foxhole line 200 yards ahead. McNiece signals everyone to halt while he moves forward alone. The M2 slung across his chest, hands visible to show he's friendly. A young lieutenant from the 502nd PIR challenges him from behind a hastily dug fighting position. McNiece identifies himself, reports enemy contact, and points back at his 8 men waiting at the orchard's edge. The lieutenant looks exhausted, dirt-smeared, probably hasn't slept since the jump. He waves them through. McNiece collapses against a tree stump while a medic checks his squad for wounds. Minor cuts, bruises, exhaustion. The paratrooper with the broken ankle gets priority attention. Everyone else just needs water and a few minutes to stop shaking. The lieutenant approaches with a notebook. He's maybe 22, fresh from officer training, trying hard to maintain some semblance of proper military procedure in the chaos of the Normandy hedgerows. "Sergeant, I need your after-action report. Command's been asking for detailed tactical assessments, especially on weapons performance in close-quarters combat." McNiece lights a cigarette with hands that won't stop trembling. Adrenaline crash. It always hits him like this after contact. The shakes, the sudden awareness that he could have died a dozen times in the last hour, the weight of knowing his decisions kept 8 men breathing. "M2 Carbine," he says. "Selector switch gives you options. Used it to suppress, flank, and extract 8 men without casualties." The lieutenant writes this down carefully, then pauses. "The Germans had you pinned with an MG-42. How did you extract without support?" McNiece takes a long drag on his cigarette. How does he explain rapid judgment? The instant calculation that staying meant dying, that going forward into fire might paradoxically be safer than waiting, that sometimes you make a choice in 3 seconds and either you're right or everyone dies and someone else gets to explain it in a report, flanked their position, suppressed the gun crew, created confusion. They didn't know our strength. We moved while they were trying to figure it out. The lieutenant keeps writing. McNiece watches him reduce a desperate scramble through mud and bullets into clean, professional sentences. Enemy contact, tactical maneuver, successful extraction, all the terror and improvisation compressed into language that makes it sound planned, deliberate, controlled. This is good detail, Sergeant. I'll forward it up the chain. 3 days later, McNiece will learn the report never went anywhere, filed and forgotten. Maybe it contradicted the official narrative about clean drops and coordinated operations. Maybe someone higher up decided small unit actions by scattered squads didn't fit the story they wanted to tell about Normandy. The word omitted will appear on a classified document he'll never see. His 8 men, extracted from that sunken farm road south of Carentan, will become a footnote that doesn't make it into battalion records. Just another chaotic engagement in the bocage. Another NCO making rapid judgments with whatever weapon he had. Another group of paratroopers who walked away when they probably shouldn't have. But right now, sitting against the tree stump with his squad alive around him and the M2 Carbine resting across his lap, McNiece doesn't know any of that yet. What the lieutenant's report doesn't say, what McNiece will never tell anyone except maybe Jensen years later over too many drinks in a bar that smells like smoke and regret, is how close the whole thing came to disaster. When McNiece vaulted over that embankment, the M2's folding stock had caught on a root. For maybe 2 seconds he'd hung there exposed, completely vulnerable, while his brain screamed at his hands to unhook the weapon. Those 2 seconds felt like an hour. He'd heard German voices close enough to understand individual words. He'd seen the Panzerfaust team turning in his direction if they'd been 1 second faster, if one of them had looked left instead of right. McNiece had gotten the carbine free and dropped into the grass, heart hammering so hard he thought the Germans might hear it. The first shots he'd fired at the Panzerfaust team weren't the calm, controlled bursts the report described. They were panic fire, full auto, wasting half a magazine just to make noise and buy himself a breath to think. The approach to the MG-42 nest hadn't been tactical genius. It had been a guess. He'd assumed they'd set up on the ridge because that's where he would have put a gun crew. If he'd been wrong, he would have crawled 50 yards in the wrong direction while his squad got massacred in the sunken road. And the shot that killed the gunner, the one the lieutenant wrote down as precise marksmanship under fire, McNiece had been aiming for the gun itself, trying to damage the weapon. The round that hit the gunner was luck, pure, random chance. Jensen had seen it all from the sunken road. He'd watched McNiece hang on that route, watched the panic fire, watched the desperate crawl toward a nest that might not have been there. He'd seen how close they'd all come to dying because their NCO had made a split-second call that could have gone horribly wrong. Later, after they'd linked up with the 502nd, Jensen had pulled McNiece aside. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the dumbest," Jensen had said. "I'm still not sure which." "Me neither," McNiece had admitted. That's the secret the report omits, that McNiece's tactical brilliance was actually improvisation built on fear, guesswork, and luck. That his rapid judgment was a 3-second gamble that could have gotten everyone killed. That the M2 Carbine's effective suppression included wasting ammunition in a moment of pure terror. The men he saved that day would tell the story for years. The Filthy 13's reputation for pulling off impossible missions would grow. McNiece would become the demolition NCO who could improvise his way out of anything, who never panicked, who always made the right call under fire. But McNiece would remember the route, the 2 seconds of being stuck, the panic fire, the luck. He'd remember that the difference between heroic extraction and entire squad lost in ambush had been one German soldier looking right instead of left, one route that finally gave way, one round that hit a target he hadn't been aiming for. Years later, someone would ask him about his combat philosophy. He'd say something about trusting your instincts, reading the ground, making quick decisions. All true, but incomplete. The fuller truth, the one he'd keep mostly to himself. Sometimes you make a choice because every other option is worse. Sometimes you're terrified and do it anyway. Sometimes you get lucky and people call it skill. And sometimes the army decides your truth doesn't fit their story, so they mark it omitted and move on. McNiece keeps the M2 Carbine for the rest of the war. It goes with him to Holland, to Bastogne, through a dozen more firefights that blur together into one long stretch of cold, fear, and decisions made in seconds. The folding stock accumulates more scratches and dents. The wood grip darkens with repeated handling. He swaps out magazines worn from use, but the weapon itself stays with him. In September 1944, during Market Garden, he uses it to clear a Dutch farmhouse where German infantry have set up a roadblock. In December, outside Bastogne, he empties 2 magazines into a tree line where Wehrmacht soldiers are trying to infiltrate American lines through early morning fog. Each time, the selector switch gives him options: semi-auto for precision, full auto for chaos. But he never forgets the sunken road near Carentan. Sometimes, back in the States after the war, he'll be riding a freight train or driving across a bridge, and the rumble will bring it all back. The feeling of being trapped. The weight of 8 faces staring at him, waiting for orders. The 2 seconds hanging on that route while death decided whether to look left or right. Jensen stays in touch for a while. They meet up in Chicago in 1947. Jensen has a job at a factory, married his high school sweetheart, trying to build something normal out of the pieces of who he used to be. They have a few drinks. Jensen eventually asks about that day. "You ever tell anyone what really happened? How close it was?" "Why would I?" McNiece says. "They marked it omitted anyway. Official records say it never happened." "But we remember," Jensen says. "Yeah," McNiece agrees. "We remember." That's the twist neither of them expected. The army didn't classify the action as secret or sensitive. They just decided it didn't fit the narrative. Too chaotic, too improvised. Too much evidence that the vaunted D-Day drop had actually been a scattered mess that survived mostly through NCOs making desperate gambles in Norman hedgerows. So the report got filed somewhere and forgotten. 8 men extracted from certain death became a statistical anomaly. McNiece's rapid judgment with the M2 Carbine became a non-event in official history. But the men who were there carry it differently. Ramirez names his first son Jacob. Bowers writes a letter to McNiece every Christmas for 30 years, always ending with "still here because of what you did." The paratrooper with the broken ankle, his name was Miller, tracks McNiece down in 1953 just to shake his hand and say, "Thank you." The M2 Carbine itself ends up in McNiece's closet wrapped in oilcloth, legal to keep as a veteran. Sometimes he takes it out, works the action, checks the folding stock. The selector switch still moves smoothly between semi and auto. He never fires it again. Doesn't need to. The paradox settles over him slowly, over years. The actions that saved lives and defined who he was to the men who served with him don't exist in official memory. The citations and commendations he received later for other missions feel less real than the thing that got omitted. His granddaughter will ask him once, decades later, what he's most proud of from the war. He thinks about bridges blown, roads held, demolitions completed. He thinks about medals and mission reports, but what he says is, "There were 8 men in a sunken road in France. They're all alive because I made a choice in 3 seconds. That's all that matters." She doesn't understand. How could she? She never felt the weight of the M2's folding stock, never saw German voices becoming faces in fog, never knew what it meant to choose movement over hesitation when either choice could kill everyone. McNiece dies in 2013. His obituary mentions the filthy 13, the combat jumps, the decorations. It doesn't mention a sunken farm road south of Carentan in June 1944, because officially that never happened. But somewhere, in files marked omitted, in memories carried by men who scattered across America after the war, in the careful weight of a grandchild's question about pride and choice, the truth survives. Not the legend. Not the myth of the fearless demolition NCO who never made mistakes. Just the reality. A terrified young man with an M2 Carbine, making rapid judgments in chaos, getting lucky when luck mattered most, and carrying the weight of those 3 seconds for the rest of his life. If this story reminded you that behind every medal and mission report, there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.